Thank you. Thank you to all the children who are leading in worship this morning. We are so blessed. I want to share with you that for the next 6 weeks, we will be living together, as we do every Sunday, really, the stories that Jesus told. And we're looking at this book called Short Stories by Jesus by a Jewish scholar, Amy Jill Levine. We have copies of this in the office if you would like. And you'll notice in your bulletin that we tell you what story we're going to be unpacking next Sunday. So that if you want to take a chance, take the opportunity to read the stories and do some thinking and praying about what they might mean in your life, it'll prepare you for the Sunday to come. So we're all given the opportunity to kind of share the same stories. One of the things I love about Jesus is that he did tell stories. I think stories are the most effective way to get inside of hearts, maybe second to music, right? Music tells story in a way that's so very powerful. But Jesus told these stories that we know of as parables, and they are huge and spacious stories, and they're still alive. And he told stories because I think he was so very aware of the fact that we are the stories that we tell. You have stories that you tell yourself. We all have stories that we tell ourselves. Some of those stories are helpful to us, and some of them aren't so helpful to us. So it's really important that we take the time to pay attention to what stories it is we choose to live by. I'll give you an example. When I was growing up, one of the stories that we told in my family, it was more of a phrase, but it got turned into a family story, was this: if your mother says jump in front of a car, you jump. Now, she didn't mean that literally, nor did my father. But the story was, who was in charge in the household? My mother was, right? And if she said jump, we were supposed to jump. Sometimes it even worked. We never jumped in front of a car, though, I must tell you. So don't that's a joke. That's just a joke. So that's an example of a story that gets told as we're growing up and as we live into our adulthood. The story that we're going to share this morning is one of my very favorites. It's the story of the prodigal son. The word prodigal means wastefully extravagant. And as we read this story together, I ask you to do a couple of things. First, pay attention to the different characters in this story. There's a story of a son, there's a story of a father, there's a story of the older brother. And what I submit to you is we are all three of those characters in our lives. We are the prodigal son sometimes. Sometimes we are the welcoming, gracious, forgiving presence in the lives of others. And other times we are resentful of what other people get because we don't think they've worked hard enough to get it. Do you agree with me that you've been all three people? I surely have. So anyway, I share with you the story that Jesus told. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So the father divided his property between his sons. And a few days later, the younger son gathered all that he had been given, and he traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be very hungry. So he went and he hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him out into the field to feed his pigs. Now, feeding pigs for a Jewish person would have been the most awful job you could ever be put to doing. But he was so glad to have that work because he would gladly have filled himself with the food that the pigs had been given to eat, but no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough to spare? And here I am, dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Therefore, treat me like one of your hired hands.' And so he set off to his father's house. But while he was still far off, his father saw him, and he was filled with compassion. And he ran, and he put his arms around his son, and he kissed him. And then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven, and I have sinned before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quick, bring a robe, the most fancy robe you can find, and put it on my son, and put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate together. For this son of mine I thought I had lost forever. I thought he was dead, but he is alive. He was lost, and he is now found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and when he came in and approached the house, he heard music and dancing, and he called one of the slaves, and he said, 'What's going on here?' And the slave replied, 'Your brother has come home, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound.' And then the older brother became angry. And he began to plead, and he became angry, and he refused to go into the party. So his father came out to look for him, and he pleaded with him, but he answered to his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your commands. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with dissolute living, you killed the fatted calf for him.' And then the father said to his upset son, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we have to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost, and now he has been found.' May God add a blessing to the reading of this word." So big stories have more than one meaning, and any preacher worth their salt could spend their whole career preaching on this story. And I hope I'm worth my salt, but I'm not going to preach the rest of my career on this story. What I want to say about this story is this. The line that grabs me in this time of my own life and of the life of this nation and of the life of the Christian movement is the line that goes right like this: He came to himself. Do you remember how it was? The prodigal son had squandered all the inheritance that his father had given him. He'd gone off, he'd partied, he'd done all those things. He found himself in a place he never thought he would be. He thought he would always have success and a way of living that would be what he thought was the dream that was his. And he finds himself desperate, and no one will help him. And rather than stay in that place, rather than stop, or rather than not asking for help, rather than just getting worse and worse and worse, what the prodigal son does is he remembers who he is. He comes to himself. And because he is willing to come to himself, he can ask for forgiveness from his father. Did you hear what he says? "Father, forgive me. I have sinned against you. Take me back. Let me come home again." Here's what I find myself thinking in these days. as a nation and as a Christian movement, we are squandering our inheritance. The United States of America was built by generation upon generation upon generation upon generation of people who knew that we have to work together in order for freedom and justice to be real for all people, right? We have squandered that inheritance, brothers and sisters. We are not living that inheritance. We are following what we think is our own right to claim what we think ought to be right without challenging ourselves to live the lessons of generations before us. We are squandering. And as a Christian movement, we are also squandering the lessons of the gospel of Jesus Christ. What is the greatest commandment, right? Thou shalt love the Lord your God with all your heart and your mind and your soul and your neighbor as yourself, right? I don't think we're talking about your Democratic neighbor or your Republican neighbor or your neighbor who earned the right to a fatted calf. We're called by the gospel of Jesus Christ to love our neighbor as ourselves. And we are squandering that inheritance, prodigals that we are, right? What the prodigal son does is he comes to himself. So what I'm saying on this morning is, what does it look like if we come to ourselves and we say, you know what, like the prodigal son, whose only recourse is to do that which is despicable, we're going to choose to live a different way. We are going to say honestly that the life we are living in our community is not working. Would you agree with me? If you watch the news, it's impossible not to have your heart broken. So what the prodigal says is, you know, this is not working. I want to remember who I am. I want to live a different way. And we are called as citizens of the United States of America and as disciples of Jesus Christ to say, what's going on right now is not working. We need to ask forgiveness. So how do we find ways to name our failures? Because we are failing. We are failing the hungry children in our midst. We are failing those who are subsisting on the things that, scraps of compassion, right? We're failing. We're not hearing each other. And what often happens when people get into a bad situation like the prodigal, what he could have done was spent time blaming somebody else for his trouble. That's going to keep us lost. What we're called to do is be honest and ask forgiveness. So like the prodigal, can we at least acknowledge our failures? Can we at least say, this isn't working. I want to live my inheritance, which is building a nation in which the teachings of Jesus Christ in the very best ways, the ones about taking care of our neighbors as we take care of ourselves, that those teachings might live. We have work to do. And I'm so grateful that when we ask for forgiveness, when we can say to God and each other, you know what, we're broken, we need to figure out a different way to live, that we can turn and return to the teachings of our core faith that say, welcome home. You messed up. It's not working so well. But I'm going to welcome you home. I'm going to throw a feast in your honor because I believe you have the courage and the goodness and the grace to build something better. We can do this work. So when we share this meal today, what we're remembering is how we can come home to ourselves. We can come to ourselves. We can remember that we're fed on the compassion and the grace of Christ Jesus. As we ask forgiveness, as we seek to listen to each other across artificial divides. May we welcome the heart of Christ in each child, in Magnolia, in ourselves, and may we allow the welcome to extend to all. That's what I have to say on this day. Amen.